What does it take to be a successful entrepreneur? A dangerous amount of coffee and a ton of grit. My name is Jason Tracy, and every week I interview business leaders to share their stories, life lessons, failures, and advice with you. Welcome to Coffee and Grit. We got to get that roar, Adam. We got to get that roar going.
That's good.
It's Monday afternoon.
It's apropos considering what happened this weekend to Chicago, right?
Right. I got Adam coming in from the Windy City right after the Lions beat the Bears, you know, so we've been talking about that. Luckily, you're a Lions fan too. So that works out. But this is Thanksgiving week, and I'm blessed to have Adam San Juan in the studio today. Super cool. And I've talked about Adam inadvertently in a couple of episodes, or maybe a couple episodes ago, just talking about how meeting people and connecting with people, right? And Adam had heard the episode with Michael Mann and reached out to me and was like, hey, I've got this book coming out. And so it was really, really awesome to have a conversation with him. And what's the reason why I inadvertently brought you up is you said I was prime rib of podcasts, you know? So you said, Adam said, I've had an opportunity to be on a lot of different podcasts. I heard what you're doing over there, and I said, this is the one. And to me, that is so awesome. It's so cool to be connected with you. And then I got the opportunity as we connected and got you scheduled on the show a couple months ago to get a chance to read your book, go through it. And so we're going to talk about some really awesome stuff today. So Adam is the author of What Are You Looking At and How It Changes Everything. And that's a good way to start off. Adam, welcome to the studio. Thank you for coming all the way.
Jason, thanks for having me.
All the way back to Michigan.
Yeah, all the way back to Michigan.
All the way back. I know you got a busy day today, but
super busy day. But this is exciting because everybody has a good story, right? The real question is, do you ever have the opportunity to share it? Sometimes they don't. And then when you do, what are the methods of sharing it? And if you can share it in a way that might inspire one or two people, I think you did it right. And I got to say, some of the stuff that I've seen come out of your shop, fantastic stuff. And that prime rib thing is an analogy that I use on a regular basis. You look at, are you a Ponderosa or a prime rib?
Yeah.
And then it becomes a representation of yourself and what you surround yourself with. So to me, it was important to be a part of not just a podcast, but one that, as you and I have chatted, we have more in common than we don't. So it just makes for a better conversation value-wise, we're on the same page.
Well, and tying into what you're talking about, I love, I opened up the book as soon as we had the conversation you handed to me, and it's like talking about why you wrote that book.
Yeah. And
creating the legacy and thinking about it, like, because we're here in this present time, but you're thinking about generations of grandkids, great grandkids. And what does that look like?
Well, it's scary to me because money just consumes people. So my stepfather passed away last year. And and I was right about in the middle when I was writing this. I wasn't exactly sure what the beginning of the book should include or what that should look like. But what ended up happening was you got to see how much grace exists in people when somebody passes away. And then you get to see how much grace people don't have when people pass away, where it's conversations about, well, what did you get? Or what did he? And I know you're cringing and you'd think that, that doesn't happen. No,
it does.
That really happens. And then it became, okay, so let's say you got what you want. Thank you, I got my pile of money. Well, then what? And then so there was a sequence there in the book where I talk about, just let's understand what people go through and when death occurs. And obviously in the early stages, everything, the wind blows and you're going to break down. But over time, you deal with it and it passes. But the sad part is you slowly but surely get forgotten. Now, that might sound morbid. And I'm not going to say completely exited or forgotten. And so the real question became, what did I want to leave behind? As I was putting this project together, it wasn't about the money. And even if there was something scheduled so that it was just perpetual and it would last forever, the source becomes forgotten. It's like, oh, thanks. Yeah, some guy many, many years ago created a trust fund and $500 ends up in my account every year. And well, where did that come from? I don't know. And I did not want that to be me. I know we have this in common. When people ask me how I'm doing, I always say something along the lines of, I've been well looked after. And it usually has nothing to do with money. I've been very blessed. And so I've always looked at it like, if you don't share a story of success or something, or what's helped you get to that point where you feel blessed, then then you really don't have a purpose, right? You're just guessing. Well, I got lucky. Oh, I hate that phrase.
Yeah.
Did you really get lucky, or did somebody want you to, or did you actually pray for something? And guess what? Ta-da! It got answered. So I would say that what I wanted to leave behind was not a pile of money. I wanted my children's children to say, there were your great grandfather. Yeah, fine. The money thing is one thing, but man, he shared with us something that helped me get through this situation. It's so interesting with children when you gasp or something like that, they'll remember that, right? So if you can share with them a way to show how you handle a situation that causes the, then I think they'll remember that. It's like, we had some crappy stuff happen to us, but man, my dad never freaked out. He was under control. Now, the moms, she would handle it differently, but we didn't have two people freaking out. And I learned a lot from watching how mom handled it versus how dad handled it. And so what I tried to do with this piece is just give that very simple pro tip on what's helped me and how to apply that. There's this phrase, and Jason, tell me if you've heard of it. You ever heard of Eli 5? ELI 5?
I have not.
So in this project, I make reference to Myers-Briggs. I make reference to Colby, I believe, and I think there's the DISC program and all that wonderful stuff. And they're very popular and they're very common. Mine's different. It's not better or worse, just as different. And I say that Eli 5 is basically just ELI 5. Explain it like I'm 5. Just keep it simple.
I like that. Yeah.
And so I says, Eli 5 something that I think people overthink. Like, if we met together we met for the first time a couple of months ago. I didn't say, hey, before we get together, I'd like for you to take this Myers-Briggs test so I can understand exactly what?
Before I deem whether you're worthy to meet with.
No, you have to cookie cut it every single time.
Yeah.
You have to walk in and say, okay, what do we have? No different than when you do this with other guests.
Yep.
You have an idea about how they're built.
But you have no idea how it's going to go.
You don't.
Yeah.
But you have to have the agility to say, okay, based upon how they're sitting, based upon what they're telling you, it isn't just what question you want to ask them, but how do you want to ask the question to get the most engagement out of them? And then if that engagement happens properly, well, then it just makes for a better conversation. Then all the walls go down. And that's when true learning happens. And I think that what this piece does is it speaks to how to thin slice that. That's a great Malcolm Gladwell reference there, or how to Eli 5 it. Book signing in Troy, there was a person that drove all the way from Ann Arbor. And I don't know, this guy was a pure retail purchaser. He got it from Amazon. He saw my book signing dates. He came out to Troy. Boy.
Wow.
It's a hike.
Yeah.
And
you didn't know him.
I didn't know him. No, this is like I said, a pure retail deal,
Yeah.
which is awesome. I love that because I have a lot of friends that come out. They bought the book. Are they going to read it? No, they don't read it. They did like say, yeah, I got to sign by an author, and I got to say, hey, look what I got. I hope they read it. But this gentleman came by all the way from Ann Arbor, and he asked if I could sign the book. I said, I'd be happy to. And he goes, I got to tell you, I didn't like the book. I thought that was awesome. I said, okay, let me see if I understand this right. You drove 33 miles to see me to get your book signed, and you didn't like the book? And he goes, yeah, I was, I couldn't follow it because you arced this story to this story and this story. And I said, well, as I put that book together, I knew that there was one personality type that would completely struggle with that, and I've just met him. But he was a remarkably linear thinker. I asked him how he drove here, and he said, "Well, I had it Google Maps mapped it out, and then I cross-referenced that with Waze to make sure that there was." And then he was just it's like, bro, this book was not meant for you, at least not written in the way for you. No different than have a conversation. It's like, look, if that's how you have a conversation, then we have I have to adjust my conversation if I want to get true engagement. And so I applaud him. I say, look, man, here's another copy of the book. Tell your friends. And he didn't like the book because he didn't like the structure of it. But he did like the content, which was perfectly fine. Yeah. But that's like anything. I have my preferences of the kind of movies that I like and the kind of reading that I like. the original manuscript on this thing, it sounded like a graduate thesis. And the editor said, okay, no. So she put in the machine, the flesh score machine, and it came out to something like 18 or 19, which basically said it's written at the collegiate, actually almost post-collegiate level. And she said, it's a tough read. She said, take it down to 8th to 10th grade level, which is what most nonfiction is, most magazines, most newspapers. I said, okay, we can do that. So I did that for a few chapters, and then I read it, and I said, hey, it didn't sound like me. And that was a problem.
That's a problem.
The second thing was that I'm not going to say it sounded dumb, but it sure sounded dumbed down, almost condescending in a way. And I said, that's definitely not me. So rewrote the whole thing basically and dropped it through that flesh score machine, came out to somewhere around 14, which basically means sophomore in college level. And I said, acceptable. And she said, well, it's still higher than most. And I said, well, good. Because if you want Dr. Seuss, that's out there, right? Yeah. I didn't want a book that was too easy to read, right? It should challenge you when you go to the gym. 10-pound curls, hey, are you really doing anything? I wanted people to say, man, that was work. Good for you, right? And so you'll remember that. And I think that's the other thing too. There we go with that remember thing, right? I just wanted to make sure that, it challenged you to a point where it didn't kill you, but you go, I can do that. When you open up the book, right, the first chapter has just 2 words, on purpose. That's 100%. Everything in there is meticulously placed in a way to challenge them. And the purpose, even as far as if you take a look at the font in this thing, and you look at the spacing.
Yeah.
I mean, I had somebody send me a video, and then she goes, asked her if I could post it. She goes, when I got it, I opened up, and she goes,
it was very nice to read.
Exactly. Said, I got this. As opposed to, forget about it. A lot of this, and as I mentioned toward the end of the book, is make reference to the philosophy of composition by Edgar Allan Poe, where he says, hey, let's just begin with the end in mind. Let's begin with the effect. And because there's so many ways. Firstly, people don't read. They listen to books more often than they read, but when they do pick up something, it can't be intimidating. So I wanted to make it designed for people old like me, right? I said, okay, font-wise, my 11-12 font. Spacing, 1.5. Page-wise, about 150 to 180 is where somebody can say, I can do this. And then make the story somewhat engaging. Going back to the guy in Ann Arbor, he really liked the middle part of it. And I said, good. And I said, what about that part? He goes, I could follow it because it was just remarkably academic. It read very textbooky with a couple of injections there of personalisms.
I'm loving this by the personality types. What was he?
Oh,
he's a square for sure, right? Yeah. I'm like square for sure.
Well, and then I went to the end of this book and said, look, I used to think I was surrounded by people who were idiots. They're not idiots. They're just not triangles like me.
I love that part.
That's exactly it. So I appreciate squares. So I had a conversation with my sister-in-law. I just got back from Vegas, hanging out with her. She was there with visiting my mom as well. And she's, you're going to love this. She's in the financial services industry. She is a compliance officer, which means she is hyper square. And she has to give a presentation to a bunch of sales guys on the topic of ethics and that's just what compliance people do. And she wanted to know if I could give her feedback on a presentation. And it was like, oh my God, this is painful. But it's there's nothing wrong about it. It's just its delivery was her style. She was comfortable in that very linear form. But and I said, that's you. I know what you want to say, but what do you want them to walk away with? And she says, I just want them to walk away with blah, 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 blah. And I said, why don't you talk to them like you're talking to me, as opposed to trying to just put this in a box and try to be perfect? And that's when I said, look, this presentation that you're going to give, perfect isn't perfect. Perfect is, I'd hate to live in that world. And so if you were to ask me what personality type that I don't say struggle with, but I love challenging, like that guy from Ann Arbor. Talk to me about this, because it's exercise for me to deal with somebody like that.
Yeah.
Because hardly flexible. And that's okay. I mean, the world, I'm married to one. Okay. And I'm glad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
My square keeps my life together.
My Lord. Paperwork, you got this, right? Call this, to me. I mean, yeah, it's so funny. Is that the best way to identify a square is just drive. And I know when I'm driving with my wife, she's real funny. She'll say, somebody's left their signal on too long. Why didn't they turn off the signal? They should have just done this. And the phrase starts with they should have. It's like you have a very keen understanding what the world should be, which means, you know what I mean?
Why'd they do it that way?
Exactly. They could have, and so it's like, okay, I appreciate the efficiency. And I was like, man, that's got to be tough to always be right. Going back to the lady with the teeth thing. So it reminds me of listening to, this is many years ago when Hugh Grant was all over the place, right? And there was a casting director for one of his movies. And they said, why did you pick Hugh Grant? And he said, because his teeth weren't perfect, which made him accessible, right? If you're too flawless, it's like, look, what did it say? I don't even remember. And so I think people want to know that, hey, you know what? You're human. And you have to treat them like human. But when you try to be perfect, now there's a way to talk to that person, right? I mean, if you're talking to engineers, you talk to them very different than you talk to you. Or you talk to...
You're not telling them stories.
No. Oh my gosh. As a matter of fact, if you said, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident for patients who chew gum, they love that. They can't have enough data. And generally, you want to take out all your punctuation and don't blink and just make one giant sentence. Ta-da, you're the best friend of a square. It's going to be funny. People are going to listen to this and like, that guy, Adam, man, he's right. But well, everybody can relate, right? I mean, and I'm not telling people anything they probably don't already know or they do naturally. I say, but if you can get good at it, it's an advantage, right? I mean, that way you know how. And it's by the way, and I do you know that I do mention you can abuse this if you're not careful. But I would say that it's meant to not be the end all be all, but just give you at least a head start on how to have a conversation. In a short amount of time, people will know, will they engage with you? And you can mess that up. And it's sometimes hard to recover from that. And so that's why the piece came. I know I threw a lot out at you.
No, I love it. Well, so like for me, being a wavy line, I loved the story. I love the story about the Planet Fitness gym elf.
Dude, that guy exists.
In Antonio. I wanted to know more. And then I finally got my fill at the end. It's like, all right, I knew there was a story behind Antonio.
That's right. I hated him. I mean, I saw him. And you know what? Okay, so let me jump to the end where I said, why not be good at this? You become a jerk like me. You judge. And then if you judge, you put somebody in a box.
You're like, I thought everybody was an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? He's one of the, I saw him last weekend. I was at Planet Fitness. I was working out. I got to be careful because I see him and I say, hey, bro, I wrote about you. No, it's like, if he read what I wrote about him,
I was so wondering if he knew.
He didn't know. He doesn't know.
I did not write a book, just so you know, Antonio. That's not the same Adam.
Okay, let's take him for example.
Yeah.
Let's say he did get the book. What do you think he'd respond? How do you think he would respond?
I don't know. Like, I think that by the time I'd get to the end, I was like, oh, Adam was an asshole. He kind of got me after that.
Yes, I was horrible. I mean, but fast forward, I think he would be like, hey, that's cool, man. He goes, I'm not for everybody. And he would have moved on. Remember, he was nothing fazed him. And I was like, man, I think the editor said, look, put something, it's got to be some kind of personal thing here that demonstrates some version of a transformation. Because I do talk about transformation. I talk about, generally, you need a base knowledge of why this stuff exists. But then let's start with observation. What do you observe? And then as you get closer to the person, then you physically engage. And then what you learn there, and then how you disengage says a lot there. But at the end of the day, there should be some version of transformation. And many people who've read this have said, look, when I read it, I started saying, okay, so I started thinking about other people and what they were like. But somewhere around page 60, they started saying, well, what am I? And they started spinning it back to themselves.
It's just so interesting because the whole time I was reading about and thinking about myself and then started thinking about other people.
Yeah, well, amen to that. It's so interesting how I wrote it and how I envision it being used.
Yeah. It's just so everybody's different, right?
Everybody's different. I love it, and I mentioned somebody that I wanted you to meet, and remarkably engaging. lady. I say that you'd like her because she's a wavy line like you. And we'll talk about, hey, does that mean that, Jason's only that? No, you have to be a lot of things.
Yep.
But at its core, I just know that about you. Anyway, so I was chatting with her, and the first thing she said when we sat down for lunch, she goes, "So what am I?" And I'm like, "Oh, hell, here we go." So I said,
nothing like throwing you into the fire now.
No, I love this.
Yeah,
So
I love
this is good
yeah.
exercise because I met her at a networking event, and she commanded the room. I mean, she had this thing locked down, very engaging, very structured. I said, I think you have a lot of triangular qualities. She goes, "Really?" She goes, "No." She goes, "I'm a wavy line." And she goes, and then her face changed. And she goes, "Man, I hated the wavy. I hated the triangle in the book." And I said, "Was I coming off like that?" And I said, "That's just me." So what you think you are,
Yeah.
She said, "I did not. That's not how I wanted to come off." I said, "Well, that's just the way I picked it up." Now, maybe I observe people differently than most, but that's the vibe I got. And so forget whether or not she was right or wrong. Nobody was right or wrong. The most important thing, as I mentioned it, there was a wonderful discussion about that. And then she was talking about her team. And I said, talk to me about some of your team members and how they were built. And the application of this, she started thinking in that way and thinking how people were coming off, more so her. So the theme of transformation is a big deal here, right? Antonio, right? His name is actually Tony.
Okay.
I was like, all right, so let me change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was a transformation in me to him, right? And that I hope everybody goes through some version of a transformation here.
Well, and I think, like if we look at why is it important to maybe have empathy for different people's personalities, and you have this guy who's around and he just annoys you, right? Like you're like, I just don't want that guy even around me. But then at the end of the day, he gives you a piece of transformational advice that once you begrudgingly do it, you're like, shit.
It's like he's right. He's absolutely right. And you know what? Maybe there's a giant fortune cookie piece that says, hey, you know what? Don't judge a book by its cover. There's 1,000 things that speak to that. But what was interesting about that story with Antonio was the exercise that he came and just said, hey, he talked about a squat exercise that if you put a plate under there and did that, you get better engagement in the glutes. Like, okay. The editor asked me, was that on purpose about the glute? No, and that's exactly what it was. She goes, he was literally kicking your ass. Like, he's that's right. Great. He's exactly right. And I didn't even see that, but you can dive into all the parts of it. But yeah, that's exactly what it was. The transformation was key to this because I didn't want to say Adam started one way and he ended the same way. No, I mean the transformation should be a realization of more people exist out there than you. One of the ladies that I make reference to in the book, Connie Podesta, her piece is called "The World," something like "The World Would Be Better If Everyone Was Like Me." I will tell you, I would not want to be married to a me. You know what I mean? I would. Yeah. It'd be disaster, honestly. It's got to be complementary. Yeah. And I think that the transformation is key, and there'll be different versions of that. So I've been thinking about maybe I should just get this out there to Antonio because wouldn't it be fun just to say, bro, read this.
Read this
and tell you, and what, we might just do that. I will just maybe I'll reach out to him and say, hey, what do you think, and see what he says. But I think he's going to respond in the way that I think he's going to respond, which is, hey man, that's cool. Yeah. I'm not for everybody, and then he'll just bounce off. Many people can learn from somebody like that. What's interesting. There's only one footnote in the book, and I thought that was one that was worth mentioning, and it was toward the end in the epilogue. Yep. The first thing I mentioned is the word "Selah," which basically is 3 words. Pause, reflect, and prepare. That's all I want you to do with this. Now, obviously dig into the word and you'll see where it came from, which is even more interesting. But that's what I want people to do, right? Just, before you judge, pause, reflect, and prepare. Before you do anything, you should do that. Be guided accordingly.
Before we get back at it, a quick shout out for our sponsor, Playbook Builder, powered by AI. This show has always been about giving the resources and the tools to small business owners in order to grow and scale your businesses successfully. And so I'm so excited to partner with a company that does just that. If you've listened and heard any of our guests, you've heard talking about building process, developing and training, building culture, are all such important pieces in order to building a great company. Well, Playbook Builder, powered by AI, has come along and revolutionized the game on how you can do that for your team and people. Whether you're onboarding new people, training and developing, continued training and developing, you're looking to scale your business or eventually sell, or most importantly, you're looking to build a legacy as a visionary. Playbook Builder, powered by AI, is able to solve those problems for you. For me, as a consultant, I've been able to plug in, and it's so amazing for what I do for clients. I can now leave a legacy. And so, for example, I'm next week training a new hire for a company, and I've been able to build out the next month of her training program using Playbook Builder, powered by AI. The cool thing about the AI, what does that do? What's the hardest part of building out a process? Taking the step by step and making it easy to learn. What the AI piece does is you can actually type in what process it is, whether you want to onboard, if you want to onboard a new employee, type in onboard a new employee and what type of industry you're in, and the AI will put together a foundation for you to build out your playbook. It is absolutely incredible. But don't take my word for it. Head on over to playbookbuilder.com, and these guys have set it up to where you can take this for a test run with no obligations. Plug in what kind of playbook you want to build. If it's a sales training playbook, for example, plug that in the description. And in the description, you can also put in what kind of industry you're in, and then hit generate, and it will generate a playbook for you. Impressed from there, and you can take a 30-day free trial of the playbook system altogether. Now, when we met in the coffee shop a few weeks ago, you were talking about, you have really, there's the foundation of this first book is really like the three things that you.
Yeah, I really am doing my best to keep my mouth shut about book number 2 and 3.
Yeah, and we don't talk about the topic.
But I will tell you, there are 3 things at the end of the day. And that I've tried to, the reason why, let me just pause back and say the reason why I'm trying to, because I want to tell everybody the second one and the third one. As a triangle, it's like, okay, you wrote a book. Okay, let's move on. I don't sit and I relish the accomplishment of what I've done. And I need to do that.
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
move on.
Yeah.
The triangle's like accomplishment done. What's next? You know, I say, wait a minute, you just did something here. And don't take away from that yet.
We live in a society that's like, what's next? What's next?
Well,
even outside of being a triangle.
I know. It's just like, okay, then no. And that's the hardest part, is just letting this take its course, let it absorb in. And then, of course, the second and third one. But in the early chapters, I mentioned, and I tried to, foreshadow this a little bit. But, there were, I make mention that this is like that Bruce Lee reference, right? This is not 10,000 kicks one time. This is, rather, I'm gonna butcher that, but it's, this is something that I've practiced the same kick 10,000 times, which means I'm kind of good at it. And I practice it every day. Like today I was at Lou's in Commerce having breakfast, and there were some new servers there, and you sit, just watch. Like, I wonder what. So the story about the book basically was that there were 3 chapters, 3 lessons that I wanted to make sure my kids walked away with. The first one is, you got to know who you're looking at. You got to know your audience. Get that wrong, we know that. And there's some well-documented parts of where people get that wrong. Getting back to my sister-in-law, I sure would like her to interject her personality in there and not try to make it perfect. But she goes, well, I know Marvel Comics is really big right now. Maybe I should make my presentation a Marvel Comics theme. So, okay, so let me ask you this. What happened at the end of Loki season 2, episode 6? She goes, I don't know. I say, don't talk about it, because it'll be very clear that you have no idea what you're talking about. I was at a presentation in, I may have mentioned this, but it was in Boston. It was a bunch of sales reps, and there was this, Fenway Park was a big deal. The Red Sox were winning stuff. And the lady was trying to give a presentation and trying to weave in baseball, and it was pretty clear
that she had no
you
idea.
have no idea. And that became painful. And so the first question that I wanted my kids to just get their arms around is that, hey, just make sure you know who you're talking, what are you looking at? Because absent of that, it's a glorified guess. And if you guess right, you got lucky. And if you guess wrong, that usually doesn't end well. The second thing I wanted to walk away with is, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. This is simple math, right? And that's really going to be the crux of the second piece. In a very atomism kind of way, I'm going to expound on that to make sure you understand what healthy relationships, and it's simple. And there's several fun stories connected with it, which I can't wait to show. And then the third thing that I wanted my kids to walk with is an answer to what were you thinking, right? And that gets all the way back to the first thing you open the book is it is on purpose. And this whole thing about what you're thinking says, what is your process for making decisions, right? And then I go into a lot of things connected with that. It's interesting. I was with my sister-in-law, and because she's one of the few people that I've kind of opened the whole thing to. The original piece, the editor said, hey, you know what? I get to 3 pieces, just finish the first one. Like, okay. 280 pages later, she goes, you're not writing a 700-page book. So finish the first one. And she said, you kind of accidentally wrote 3. So like, okay, first world problems. So what I'm going to do is 2025, that'll come out. And then 2027, the third one will come out. And then I think it'd be a wonderful trilogy. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, if people do these 3 things right, I'm not going to guarantee you're going to be rich. But I think your outcomes will be a little bit more predictable. And you'll probably, go through life with a little bit less stress if you just took the time to understand what you're looking at, who you surround yourself with. And it's I'll put them in question form. What are you looking at? What am I doing here? Right. And the last one is what we're thinking. And if you can find a way to answer all of those properly, so that's a super forecast and super semi-spoiler on what the next one's coming.
Yeah.
But they all built. And I'm excited to put those together.
And again, you talk about I forgot what you said. Was it the 5 mil or something like that, or essentially is the beginning of making it really simple. And you take those 3 questions that are really simple, but they're life changing.
Yeah, they are. Well, that gets to that whole Eli 5 thing.
Eli 5, that's what it was.
Yeah,
I'm like, mil, I don't know. I lost my acronym.
No. Eli 5 is key because, like I said, the amount of research I've done on this thing, like I said, I've been working on this for a couple of years. And it's I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I just knew that there was something I wanted to pass down. And there's the whole idea about how to write a book. I researched that and said, okay, so this is this concept of mind mapping. What's in your mind? Just throw it onto the table. I mean, and if this was, there's a program on my iPad that lets me create little yellow stickies. So I just yellow sticky, boom, throw it. Just doesn't matter. And it was just a sea of yellow stickies. And I said, okay, so I think categorize that here, put this here, put this here. And I said, okay, they all fall into 3 different piles. And the next thing you know, okay, let's take this pile and then this pile and this pile. And then now it becomes organization. All of a sudden it started saying, oh, I think I have something to say. And then next thing you know is, well, how bad do you want to get this out of your head into the hands of your kids? And then my father-in-law passed away. And I said, I got to hustle because tomorrow, what if I did? Then I'm just another guy that said, man, I really wish I would have wrote that. I really wish I would have said, then why didn't you? The forward is fantastic. The lady who wrote the forward is a true mentor. And she's also mentioned the acknowledgments. Everybody needs a super nudger, right?
Was she the first one that was basically kicking your ass to be? Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. You're all talk, San Juan.
Yeah.
So F that, man. But at the same time, she was not wrong. But and I wouldn't say that there are people who are all talk for the purpose of just talking and maybe, conflating their ideas. And then there's some that generally have that as something you want to do and either just didn't get around to it. But for me, I just was worried that, God, if I didn't get this out, then what? And then I did, and now the feedback is coming back. My son, he read it, and he's a big time circle. His wife read it, and she's kind of very wavy liney. And she goes, you could basically, if you could bedazzle the book, she wanted bedazzled. And Aaron wanted to say, well, it should be a little bit more inclusive. Well, there you go. I mean, let's think about this. He's a firefighter, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so his job is to make sure everybody's good.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can write anything for one specific person. So I said, I'm going to write it as me, but I should be able to have a discussion about exactly why it's written the way it is. And I can't try to appease everybody. But it's important to understand everybody and should be able to alter that conversation. So, that's an interesting thing. You know, I thought the fun part about this was just kind of putting together how did this even come about? And that story about, you know, waiting in line, you know, to pick up my wife with all the rest of the Asian men. I did not. I said, man, I'm like a sheep in this joint. Like, this is so embarrassing. I'm looking, man. It's like, and Filipinos, it is like, hi. We go like this. That's a little head nod, like, oh my Lord.
You're falling into suit.
What if I'm becoming? It's like, this is horrible. And then I also make reference to a couple other things. Like, you know, back in high school, I was a mobile DJ, and I stopped because there was a lot of Asian mobile DJs. And I'm like, all right, so I'm not doing that. Got out of that. Went to college, and I was a freshman. I was good at art. And then, you know, there was a bunch of people far better than I was and loved it more than I did. And there were just too many Asians. That's such horrible. But I mean, you know, and I do right. Say I have no aversion to Asians. I love my community. My people are fantastic people. But
you just didn't want to be like
I just didn't want to be another whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever it may be.
Whatever.
And one of the things that I coach, there's a young man I'm working with in Royal Oak. And I got to listen to his pitch, and he, you know, and again, he's exactly who I wrote this for. He goes, I just missed my sales goal by X. If I could have just done something differently, I said, well, let's find that different thing. You know, he's exactly who this is written for, right? To find that little extra edge if you would have done something differently. So yeah, that was kind of fun. I gave my brothers a challenge. I said, look,
circle and a square, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know they'd be good at this.
Yeah.
And I said, find me another, how many Filipino authors are there? Just for giggles. And they did that. And I said, okay, there's a bunch. There's a bunch. And then it said, okay, let's then first generation Filipino American, born in the States. Okay, so out. And you got to be alive. So, okay, if you're,
yeah.
And it can't be a memoir because there's a lot of, you know, to my Lola or my Lolo, and then Lola and Lola mean grandfather. And that's different. And I have yet to find one. And I'm looking for that because I would love to have this conversation about that. But it's interesting that somebody brought that up, said, I think you might be one of the first Filipino American nonfiction authors. And I'm like, I don't find one. Because I would love to pick their mind and say, what did you see? There was a guy on the East Coast who graduated from Harvard and Cornell, published by Penguin. I mean, this guy's a big deal. His book is a very different read. And there's a bunch of folks who've submitted medical journal publication, you know, been published in medical journals, and different read, different account. But to me, I'm not afraid to seek that out and say, hey, let's understand the processes, what you go through, and, you know, criticize it. I can just take it apart and help me understand it because I just want to get better at it. I love how it's built now. I mean, everything is put in a very purposeful way, but I don't think my way is the way. I just love to hear what people are walking away with it.
What do you think it is about you that wanted to like stand out and be different in the community?
Probably a couple of things. One, physically, I was always a smaller kid. It's so funny that my friends, I said, we'll give these short jokes. Like, you know, and it's like, look, you put me in the Philippines, I'm a giant. So, you know, like, whatever, man. I am a hard person to offend. But I think it was, you know, that's actually going to be interesting because you'll probably see more of that in book number 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because really, if it's what am I doing here, right? Like, okay, well, then how am I different? And so there's a couple of stories that lead to that. But I just think it's, I think everybody should ask themselves that, right, Jason? I mean, it's like, what makes you unique?
Absolutely.
And if they can't answer that, I hate to say it, that's a bit of a problem. I don't care how you answer it, but it should have that thing pinned down. And then again, that's just an extension of the question that we just talked about. What makes you different? And I just didn't think I could have answered that until I studied. I said, okay, so let's take a look around and then just watch people, a lot of people. Watch yourself, document your behaviors. I know that sounds like a lot. It's a lot of work, but being a decent human's a lot of work, right? So I don't care how you do it or how you self-reflect or how you get better or how you evaluate or how you answer that question. Just find a way to do it. This is how I did it.
But in the end result comes back to the very beginning of what you said of like, I lived a blessed life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because like we talk about how hard it is. There was this a few years ago, far before I started my business, I went out to a Starbucks. I've told this story a couple times, so I'll be as quick as possible. But I went out to a Starbucks, and there was this guy that behind the counter, a barista, that was having a really bad day. You could just tell it, like he was being rude to everybody, having a really bad day. You could see the stress on his face, and so I was like, my goal today is I'm going to get this guy to smile, right? It's wavy line. I'm going to get this guy to smile. So I get up there and I order my coffee and like, I'm making jokes. Nothing's working. Everybody else is laughing around me. You know, like this guy's yawning. I'm like, man, don't you work at a coffee shop? Don't they supply you with this stuff? Like, come on, let's go. And then he gives me my little sample cup of coffee when I ordered a large and I'm like, this is not going to go well. Right. So he's like, I'm like, I ordered a large. I need a larger coffee for that. It's going to be a bigger, longer day than this like little cup. He's like, and then he's like trying to type in the computer and it's not working. He's getting even, you know, more up. So long story short, he has to go back to the manager. He comes back and he was like, here, my manager just said, take the coffee. We're not going to charge you anymore. And I was like, I really appreciate what you did there. Yeah. He was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I know you didn't have to go back and get me hooked up. And I just really appreciate how you took the initiative. You went back and talked to your boss and you got me hooked up. And I gave him a $5 bill and was like, I appreciate you.
And I would say that's remarkably wavy line of you because that's what you would do.
That's what I do, right? But so like my whole point behind that story is I left that Panera Bread that day. I posted something on Facebook about like, it's not hard to bring a smile. It didn't take much of my day. Yeah. It cost me $5 that day, but not everything is money. You know, most of the time, if you just acknowledge somebody, look in their eyes and say, ask them a question, you know, that kind of thing, you can make somebody's day. And so I threw out a challenge to people, and all weekend long, I'm getting these messages from people that are just like, they're living a blessed life because they went out and blessed other people's lives. And my thesis at the end of it was, it seems like it's hard. It seems like it's hard to take that extra second to notice somebody, to look up from your phone, to like bring a smile to somebody's face, but it's not. And not only that is it not hard, but the result of it is that you lived a blessed life. You have
to be intentional about it, right? You go to the gym, people go and I flail or whatever, and that's cool, right? I mean, at least you're there.
At least you're there,
right?
Yeah.
But when I go, it's like, okay, today is a leg day. Today is but this is exactly, and I'm. It's called Deliberate Practice. Yep. Angela Duckworth's book called Grit, fantastic read. She talks about deliberate practice. And deliberate is just another phrase of just do it on purpose, right? Go out there. So how do you, to do what you did, that wasn't the first. Your eyes are open to that. And then here's the thing is you practice it, and then running into somebody who's having a bad day is not foreign to you. Yeah. You know how to handle the situation. Not everybody has that grace.
That's true.
Right? Yes. And I think that he's lucky that he ran into a wavy line. Because if he ran into a square, you'd have or a triangle, for God's sake, you'd have a whole different, scenario. Yeah.
That's such a good point.
Seriously.
Yeah,
I mean, that is where it's like he said, you're lucky you ran into Jason. Yeah. Because the opposite, if you ran to the opposite of Jason, we would have had a whole different outcome. But you don't fear that. You drop you in a room, you just with strangers, just friends you haven't met yet, right? And that just comes natural to you. And what I was trying to do with this piece is saying, if it doesn't come natural to you, try a few things. Yeah. One of the things in this book that was interesting was the index at the back, and I was debating. I wanted to put it in. The editor said, just not just not common. And I said, well, I want it in there, so we put it in there. And many people say that's one of their favorite parts about the book. So if they identify somebody, they say, okay, so how does that person engage, disengage? How do they behave in a family situation? How do they behave in a social environment?
Yeah.
How do they behave in a professional environment? All useful, right? So
I almost re-recorded my voicemail, by the way. I was like, this is a wavy line voicemail. It was like, this is a nice script.
I had a lot.
Some of them were cheesy, and I was like, the wavy line. That's me right there. Look at that.
But a triangle would be like, oh my God, you get to the point. That's just how it is. You should listen to my voicemail. Oh my Lord. It's probably a good combination of a triangle and a wavy line.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to exude a little bit of energy, but still a little level of assertiveness. And that brings up an interesting question, because there was a late entry to this book that I had as a conversation with my daughter, because I do mention her in here a bit, and how she just took this idea and ran with it. And she was a wavy line. So she read this and she goes, I think I'm a square, but each side is made of wavy lines. I said, that is and I said, okay, that's interesting.
That's really interesting.
So I would say that my voicemail is probably a triangle shape with wavy lines, which then led to, can you be more? Of course you can be more than one shape. You should be more than one shape, and they'll probably blend. But then it led to this question: is not only are people multiple shapes, but what causes that? And for my daughter, she had a baby. And then everything was, the box, the rules. I mean, but she puts her own flair to it. There you go. You have a square shape or wavy lines. A voicemail, triangle, wavy lines. And I wanted to just expound on that topic a little bit in the piece and say that, you know what, it's important to know that shape shifting does exist, right? You will, over time, a life event will change that. I find myself becoming more, this is so strange, but more circular which is the complete opposite of Adam the Triangle. Because it's like, man, you know what? Try to offend me, because I don't care and I'll move on. I know this sounds arrogant, but
yeah,
I mentioned that's one of the characteristics that you have to be careful of depending on your shape. But the more, the older I get, the more aware I am, and it's causing me to. I'm working on this. It's causing me to change a little bit, and I think the answer is this: one of the biggest weaknesses of a triangle is the lack of empathy. It's like, yeah, man, get over it, shake it off, get up, you're fine.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Where I needed to work on my empathy, and I mean hard, right? So when I go to a restaurant, people who've gone to a restaurant, I always ask the server, "What's your name?" That's the first thing I ask, and then I get to know. And I'm studying them, because I want to get the best kind of service. So, what are they telling me? Again, this is right out of it. What are they telling me about them? I mean, and that idea of trying to understand people more has developed its own empathy. Now, I'm not saying I don't have any less of an edge to me, but I see myself just. And maybe it's just the older you get, you just do that and say, okay, do you need to be so rigid, right? Maybe you just need to, maybe you're changing shapes, right? And that's not a bad thing. You should. But as long as it's done organically and unintentional. I mean,
because I love how you talk about that too.
Oh my God, that's such a big deal. Yeah.
I've been teaching sales, or been in sales or teaching sales the majority of my career. Yeah. And I think that as a question I get asked the most is, what's the top salesperson doing? Can I go do what the top? No, you're not him. You're not him. That person is a very, very unique person. They don't follow many rules. Like, they just show up and it happens, right? And you can't be him. And if you try to be him,
it's not good.
It's not good. It's like it's like Rudolph. It's coming up to Christmas, so like Rudolph, the movie, when he put the black nose on, and it was uncomfortable. He talked funny, like people didn't like him. Right. He lets out that red nose, and all of a sudden he's got a difference maker.
Exactly. So
as soon as he embraced it and said, "I don't give a shit."
Yeah, exactly. He exactly. And then he would have been just another reindeer.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the beautiful parts about that story, is that, he was built to be different. I think we all are, though. If you think about it, it's like, look,
Built to be different.
you know, it's interesting. I was in a networking group in Chicago, and we went around there and talked about, you know, your biggest professional setbacks. And everybody was talking about these things. Well, you know what? I didn't make this one sale, and then I got put on probation or whatever. And okay, fine. And then it came down to me, and they said, "So, Adam, what profession, what setbacks?" And I go, "Can't think of one." You know, I said, bad things have happened, but you know what? It's always gotten better.
Yeah.
I don't know I said, I can't describe it, but when that happens to me, it's somebody saying, you didn't need that anyway, right? So let's look forward. I guess I always look forward, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, how does that pertain to the shape-shifting thing? You know what? Just be careful what you ask for, because I mean, it'll show itself in as you become who you are, and you've got to do that and let that happen naturally. Now, in the book, I make mention to a guy named Steve Bonnet, right? The gentleman pirate. That guy had no business being a pirate. As a matter of fact, crazy is that there's a show, I think it's on Hulu or Prime, I can't remember what it's called, but it's called Our Flag Means Death. And my wife, they said, oh, you got to watch this. I'm like, okay, so I watched it, and it said the story of Steve Bonnet, the gentleman's pirate. I'm like, holy crap, that was released last year or the year and a half. I said, I started writing that 2 years ago.
Wow.
And he was in there. I'm like,
yeah.
And I was like, holy, and of course it does say Steve Bonnet, the gentleman's pirate. I'm like, holy crap, that is. He was already a character in my book before he ended up.
That's so crazy. I'd never heard of him before.
Nobody has.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, that's in there. I think anybody can learn from him because he tried to be something he wasn't. The miniseries is a riot, and then they take it to a whole different level. But at the end of the day, it's directionally accurate. This is a guy that was a landowner. He had a beautiful wife, had 2 girls. That he just felt he wanted to be a pirate. He didn't want to be a different pirate. He wanted to be the gentleman's pirate. And the show, I write about it to the extent that, you know, he did fail miserably. And guess what? We already talked about that's what's going to happen if you try to force something you're not. Think about the lady that's going to give a presentation at Fenway to try to talk about baseball when it's clear that she knows nothing about baseball. Don't. You know what she should have did?
Make jokes about it.
She should have. She should have said, hey, let me just pause for a second. Is it pretty obvious I know nothing about baseball? Exactly.
I would have cracked up.
Yes. And everybody would applaud it, and then she could just go. Now you can sit, you have them right.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
My sister-in-law, she's trying to orchestrate this topic of compliance does nothing for me as a sales guy. I'm like, all right, can we just get this out?
Compliance.
I know. But,
I could never be in insurance because of compliance.
Lord. Our world is just so crazy. But she was giving her presentation. I said, why don't you just, before you, because she just wanted to go A, B, C, D. Oh, this is brutal. Of course it's brutal. But if she was going through, you know, part of her presentation, she goes, well, let me just stop there and let you know how relevant this is. Saturday night, when I was going through my compliance journals, I decided to take a break and just go through some Instagram reels. And I found one that was relative, and then just talk about that and say, you might have seen it, blah, 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 blah. And then jump back at it. People will be like, okay, you are a dork Saturday night reading compliance journals. But you're human.
Yeah.
You do what most humans do. It's like you need a guilty break, rifle through some Instagram reels to reset you and go. And then find one that's somewhat relative. The point in all of that is that, you know what? She goes, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And I say, just try it, right? Because I think people need to know you're human and you're not an Autobot. And I think those are those little, you know, injections there that I think people could use if you're going to try to do something that you're not going to do, you know, find a way to, well, she delivered the steak medium rare, but everybody likes it well done, right? I said, remember, they're there trying to consume from you. Don't give them what you want. Give them what they want. You and I are familiar with the golden rule, you know, treat everybody the way you want to. I think that's almost right. I think you treat people the way they want to be treated, right? Just because I like my steak medium rare doesn't mean everybody else does.
Right?
So
true.
And that's what this says. It's like, look, you just listen. They'll tell you how they like consuming information, how they like consuming a solution, advice. even say, if somebody asks, this is such a dangerous question to ask. If someone says, hey, Jason, I'd like your advice on something. You better know something about the person, because if you give it the way you want, they'd be like, hey, that was useless.
Yep.
Right. Or you can say, okay, I know this person is very structured, so let me give them a checklist and a step-by-step. One of the programs I think I barely mentioned in this is a different kind of book, but similar. If you're familiar with Colby at all,
yeah,
I love it. I say just look how people take action. Now it's somewhat relevant,
yep,
but different. But that's important to know. Is some people will build a plane and fly at the same time. Some people or other people will say, look, let me, you know what I mean, map it all out.
Map it out a little bit.
And take that approach to doing it. But again, if somebody asks you for advice and you don't know who you're looking at, then you might get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, there's like, you know what, he doesn't listen very well. And then guess what? He'll probably tell his friends. He'll say, no, someone say, did you talk to Jason? Because that, if he runs to another wave, it's like, oh yeah, Jason. Yeah, he wasn't very helpful. But he's a nice guy, but I don't think he was helpful.
Yeah.
And then again, that becomes the misconception, right? So earlier I mentioned, look, if you're going to fight with your spouse, you probably should read the book, right? If you are single and you went on a date and didn't go on a second date, but want to go on a second date, you probably should read the book, right? I talk about the sales guy. If you just missed a goal, I even say, look, if you can't get your 5-year-old to take a nap, probably should read the book, because they're probably telling you. That's even harder because
kids are so hard.
Oh my God. Well, they can't tell you.
Yeah.
But they'll show you. You just have to know what to look for. That's why there's a huge section in this book that speaks to the observation, not even interaction, but just the observation. Then we can say, okay, how is this kid built? How's anybody built? And then how to respond to that.
My kid's 15, and I've been like, is he a triangle? Is he a square? I think he's like right in between there.
Actually, there's to Eli 5, this even more. There's two types of people, and they're subdivided into 2 sections, equals to 4. There are people who are interested in people. There are people who are interested in things. People who are interested in people, they're your circle. Those are your wavy lines. People who are interested in things like processes, outcomes, right?
Yep.
How something was done.
Yep. That's
that. So if I'm talking to somebody and I try to, there's a couple ways to do this. I try to find out, okay, so what shape they are, what's the best way to communicate to them. And I start with the people versus things thing. And then I say, okay, of that, was it a circle, wavy line, or is it a triangle or a square? And then I go from there. But I think the best way to do this is let's go back to lunch with my friend Michelle. She, what am I? I'm like, okay. I actually went backwards, you know what I mean? And I think that would be say, okay, let's do this whole differential diagnosis thing. Let me just talk about what you're not. Right? And then once I did that, then you can pick, okay, so you're going to become directionally accurate. So whoever reads this piece and say, hey, how do I apply that to my family? How do I apply that to my friends? Or if you have a meeting coming up, how do you apply it? You know what? Work backwards. Find out what they're not. It's like, well, no, they're not an engineer type. Okay, good. That's good. That carves out a lot.
Yep.
And then it'll ultimately show itself. And you'll go, okay. But here's the thing. Like I said, be fluid with this stuff. If you try to be rigid with it and say, okay, you are harsh.
And you talked about that too, because it's like then you're generalizing and putting people in too much of a box.
And you never let them out. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because then you'll just say, okay, you are that, and you'll treat them like that. And that's why I think managers should read this to say that, look, give some people some leash. I mean, it'll help, but don't think that that's the way they're going to be. Humans have a way of surprising you, right? They need to not get. I know it's such a bit of ironic because I think it's helpful, but I don't want anybody to be really good at this.
Yeah.
But have I guess a working knowledge of it. It is possible to do this too much. Like anything, it's like you can study people all day, but studying and actually practicing it, I'm so glad. I hate crowds.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But I love learning about people. There's a great video out there on YouTube that talks about the difference between Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and their characters as Iron Man and
Thor.
He's Captain America, right?
Yeah.
And they parlay their characters into the way they were interviewed at different, Comic-Con events and whatnot. And they talked about their different styles. And is it better to be cool or is it better to be liked? And it talked about the different approaches they took. And I was going through that and I'm thinking, man, that is right in here. So if you get a chance to check that out, I think you'll say, okay, so there's some really cool applications to that part.
That's really cool. It's really cool. You can see it. And I love how you said that, like, it's really putting into action. Because so many people, you can read books.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great information. But if you don't go out there and then put it into an applicable sense.
Well, when somebody reads it, I say, so what'd you do with it?
Exactly.
That's how I say, what'd you do with it? And then, we'll see.
What kind of responses do you get from that?
Yeah, that's crazy. It depends.
Yeah.
You know what? Like the guy from Ann Arbor. It's like, well, the structure was like, oh, geez, okay. You took it apart. Good.
I still love that he drove all the way from Ann Arbor.
I gave him an extra book. It's like tell your friends, man.
What did he say took him out? Like, what brought him out there? What was his motivating factor to come out?
Well, it's like any square. It was something that wasn't solved, and he wanted to get. Remember, Square. You can't give Square enough information.
So motivated back.
He can't give him enough information. So he's but I applauded him because if he didn't like it, I mean, he's an intelligent man. But let's think about this. It's something I touched a nerve in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then I did it right.
Yeah, good. Absolutely. That's it.
Did I mentioned this earlier? Did it make you uncomfortable? Yeah, good. Then I did it right.
And it goes back to, is it better being cool or being liked?
Absolutely. Yeah, so it was fun, but people are using it in different ways. And I'm asking them, like, oh my gosh, I was with my mom, and she was so proud. I mean, my heart swells when I think about it. But I got to see her book because she got a copy of the book, and she had. I mean, it was almost like a little portable shrine. My 8th grade picture was in there with heart. She freaking bedazzled the thing. And then she underlined some things and she put little hearts. And I asked my brother and his wife, because they were down, I said, did you get a chance to read it? She said, no, we tried getting a copy of Mom's, but she won't let us have it. I mean, when I saw it, with the little, what's my 8th grade picture doing in there? But she's super proud. So I'm not exactly sure how she's using it, but she is. I know that when she talks to me about the people at church or wherever she's at, I'll ask her, so what is Violi like? Oh yeah, she's big time circle. I'm like, good for you, Mom. Good for you. So she's trying, right? So as long as I can tell when somebody's actually read it and somebody's hasn't, and then I'm okay with that. I mean, you will. I mean, and you'll run into it. I said if you get stuck, then you know what, fine. But the reality is, if they consume it in a way that's relative to them, I don't care, because what'll happen is that, and I make mention to this in the book. I remember this thing started at 280 pages, and can you imagine? I mean, the stuff that made it, that was on the floor, you could write another volume of that.
Yeah.
But toward the end, I write, it's enough, and there's a phrase. Sales guys know Glenn Ross, right? No, we all know the Alec Baldwin best 7 minutes of his life, but there was a part where Williamson, which was Kevin Spacey, was talking to Pacino, who played Ricky Roma. And Ricky Roma said, "Would you give me a pack of gum and tell me how to chew it?" That's when I said, "That's enough. Like, I don't need to tell you how to use it.
Yeah,
just use it.
Interpret it.
You're a smart person. You'll use it."
And what I've loved this conversation is we've talked about so many different people that are using it or reading it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope they continue to do that. I hope younger people find a way to embrace this. And my niece, she goes to school at University of Illinois, and she's a business major, and she's trying to orchestrate this kind of little fundraiser thing. And I said, with the business group that they have there, and I said, you know what, have me come down. You know what I mean? I said, bring down 50 books. Everybody who registers, charge them X, right? And I'll break this down to them. And she hasn't read the book yet. She's actually going to get it tomorrow. And I can't wait till she reads it, because she reminds me a lot of my daughter. Well, she'll see it immediately. She's a dancer. She's used to creating, and she's going to say, "Oh my gosh, I could do this with this," and that's exactly what my daughter thought. And she took that, she turned it to an English speech, which turned into a presentation to all of the staff at Wallach Western. So, I mean, but I didn't have to tell her to do that, because She was a wavy line. So she saw, she goes, oh, it can do this. My hope is that she does that, because now here I am delivering it this way and then deploying it out there. It's like, just find something. Now, does it help my niece? Absolutely. Knock yourself. Good. Because she reminds me so much of my daughter. But there'll be somebody that it'll inspire. It's so interesting is my mom wants me to write her memoir. And I said, okay, that's fine. I said, Mom, let's just think about this. I said, come, Mom, your memoir is done. What are you going to do with it? Oh, she goes, we're going to be rich. I want to say, A, you're not that interesting. And I said, and then B, you're not that interesting. Which gets to I'm trying to get, why do you want to write this? And she wants to write it. This must be a generational thing, because I didn't grow up saying, I want to be rich. That's just not me.
Uh-huh.
My mom's, could be a generational thing. You come to America, right? I mean,
you can be rich.
You might make money.
Yeah.
And so, that's what she has in her mind's eye. And I'm going to have to compromise that a little bit. So the first thing she got, when she got the book, she goes, oh my God, I can't believe we wrote a book. I'm so proud of you. She said, am I in it? I said, you can go Control F. And the word mom does not show up anywhere. I said, Mom, you're not in there at all. And she goes, what's it about? I said, just read it. The second one will be, because of the topic. It's relevant. There's a story arc there that I'm trying to put shape to. The crazy thing about doing research for that, including my mom in that, is I've got to ask her some questions about her past and situations. And she is an interesting lady. She's very interesting. But I want her to write it. I want to get to the why. Like, why are you writing this? Because my why was pretty straightforward.
Your why was pretty straightforward.
Right. Yep. And I said, look, if this sells one copy or a million copies, just as long as my son and daughter get a copy, I'm good. Whatever happens is, I've been well looked after. I've been very blessed. This is just a part of Adam. This isn't the Adam. And I don't even know what's going to happen. But I do know that, there are some people that have been positively affected by it, which to me is enough. And money's always taking care of itself. I never chased it. I'm basically talking exactly what's sitting in that. I never chased it. It was just a byproduct of just doing a bunch of little good things, and then the rest happens. So it'll be interesting as I put shape to that second project. It'll break her heart to say, I don't think we're going to write a memoir, because I don't know if your why is exactly why you should be doing it.
Well, because then she's disappointed when she doesn't make $1 million off of her book. Because if it is like, if she's looking at it from a legacy standpoint, like you are, to pass down to the grandkids, the great grandkids, to tell that family story and the family history, it doesn't matter if it sells. It's a labor of love. You put in that work, she gets to work with you. There's so many beautiful things.
Oh my gosh. The conversations we're having are fantastic. It's like, wow, I didn't know that. Here's a funny thing about my mom. I didn't realize, but now I say, oh, okay. So when I grew up, I was like, man, we had a very tumultuous relationship. And I was like, man, I'm not like my mom. But the more I learn about it, it's like, holy crap, I'm exactly like my mom. And so
you're probably two triangles like bumping into each other.
Yes, absolutely. So what was interesting is, I didn't know this, but imagine, so she was born in 1940. So in 1957, she was a freshman in college in the Philippines. She dyed her hair completely blonde. And she was a cute girl, and she just wanted to be different, man. And here I am. And so I see where I get it, right?
That goes back to my question earlier. Exactly. You answered it here. It comes back to your mom.
That's where. So I did tell her that you're in the book, but you're not mentioned by name, right? If you read it properly, you're there. But the second one's going to be more intentional because, like I said, it's a good build. Putting this together, 2 years, right? Is that a long time? It seems like a long time. Remember, I have a full-time job, right? And there's an interesting story about that. But, in putting this together, it needed to be done right, because I knew it set up the next the next,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I didn't want somebody to say, oh, okay, the first one's that, but the second one, where did that come from? So, spending time with the right editor, making sure the tonality was right, making sure the number of pages right. I can't do $180 here and the next one is going to be 300. It's like, okay, no,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
sense. Yeah.
Exactly, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. So there's a congruence there. But the story that was interesting about, remember, I have a full-time job, right? And knock on wood, I'm having a pretty blessed year. This was probably standing on second and third base-ish in May. And, we all have sales goals. I have my sales goals. And in May, June-ish, I was very fortunate to win a very large piece of business, which basically helped me 2023 goal established. Now, I didn't look like, oh, okay, now I can coast. No, I've won large opportunities in the past, and it isn't like, okay, now I can breathe. No, I generally keep going. But, it was interesting is that, okay, here I was, June, that my 2023 goal was done. So I thought, God said, finish it already. Just go, finish it already. So I worked hard at it. At the same time, still, business kept coming in. I'll tell you, man. You know what I mean? And then my goal was to say by the time I turned 55, which was November 7th, I'd have this thing done. And then it was done by October 1st. So I don't know. Again, it isn't
When you set it with intention.
Yeah.
And God takes care of you.
He
like
does.
He says you.
Let's tell you. I mean, I have this conversation regularly. It's like, here's a funny story. So I do woodworking, and that's my little safe space. It's tools don't yell back. They talk when I tell them to talk. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. And I bought this thing called a CNC machine. And I bought it about 3 years ago. And I just didn't get anything. I got one. I got the Mac Daddy. It's got all the goodies on it. And I was at dinner with my wife at the client, and I gave my client this cutting board, this charcuterie board, all engraved, beautiful. And he was appreciative of it. And the guy goes, how much I owe you? I said, you owe me nothing. Oh, he goes, how much would you normally charge for this? I said, $100. And then he said, how did you do this? I said, well, I have a machine. It's called a CNC machine. I'm describing it. And then I said, and then he goes, well, don't mind me asking, how much that thing costs? I said, all the toys, about $8,000. And my wife goes, what? I was like, yeah. And I was like, here we go. Okay. So she goes, you spent $8,000. She goes, you know how many cutters? Like, yeah, I know exactly how many cutters. She says, but I didn't, that's my peace place, right? That's my cave, right? And I said, but let me just ask you this. And for the 29 years that we've been married, have we gone backwards? Have you felt have you felt that, oh my God, the lights didn't go on? Did you pay the bill? I said, no. I said, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just, and that's the perspective I think that people need to search for, right? And you got to have those conversations, because that had the propensity to be an argument. I said, but let's just keep this in perspective. Have you ever not got? Were we ever hungry? Right? Have the kids? Did they not go to college? And we can go on and have this conversation, and that's a perspective that I think absent of it leads to big arguments. But no, that was a kind of funny thing. I hope that somewhere in this book that the idea of perspective comes into play, because that's what it was. Only a couple of people made the connection to the elephant, and a couple of the stories in there. Page 45, I believe. Let me just take a peek here. Depends on what it be, paperback or you do soft copy. No, it is page 44. It was also a last minute entry into the book. I was here in Brighton, of all places, CBC Church. Pastor Steve.
Okay.
He talked about this story in a parable, an Indian parable about these 5 blind men trying to describe an elephant. And one was holding its tusk and said it's a spear. Somebody was holding, its ear and says it's a fan.
Yeah.
Right? And then the leg, it was a trunk, side, it was a wall, tail, it was a snake. And they were all wrong because they were holding it apart. They just didn't see the whole thing. And that's really what the cover was about, is that there's somebody there, looks like they're kind of searching a little bit. And I think we need to realize you're not just holding a spear or a fan or a wall or a tree or a snake. You're take a step back. You're looking at an elephant. Yeah, and that's all.
I love that at the end where you're like, it's not a tree, it's not a snake, it's not a spear, it's an elephant.
But there are some people who hold on to it and say, hey, that's what it is. Okay, then there's
no reason to argue with them. Like, exactly. Let them hold a snake.
If that's what you believe, so be it. But there's
ignorance is bliss. Go ahead and hold your snake, and I'll be over here looking at the elephant.
Exactly. So but the hard part is saying, like you just said, how do you let them be wrong?
Yeah.
Right? How do you let them say, okay, you don't see the whole thing, but you will. You know what I mean? And I think it's just a matter of time before, no pun intended, you open your eyes and think, okay, so whoa, it's an elephant. Like, yeah. So what is this book? I don't know what it is. But I think it's bigger than just, hey, you know what? Thank you for helping me get through a networking event. Okay, that could be part of it, but there's more going on here. There was a young man that read twice, and the first year he consumed it as just a regular reader. Then he actually took it apart, saying, okay, why is this here? Why is this here? Why is this here? The flow, why was this story? And he said, there's a lot going on here. It's like, oh yeah. I mean, like I said, everything was put together in a place and in sequence, and was all on purpose. So,
dude, like for the audience, what is it? If you want to know, we've been talking about it here for about an hour, hour 20.
Oh my Lord, look at the time.
I know, hour 20, and that's I love it when people say that. Oh my God. Yeah. If you want to know more about it, you want to know what it's about, check it out. We're gonna have the links in the podcast, so you can check it out.
Yeah.
Adam, man, thanks so much for reaching out. Thanks so much for coming in here and being in the studio.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely.